to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here with you as well. And we're talking about truth decay tonight, right, Doug?
Truth decay.
Truth decay. So we've done shows like this in the past, Doug, but you've got a pretty good litany of stuff based on a book written by, who's the book?
Jason Lisle.
Oh, he's one of my favorites, yeah. So.
And we have a issue that we're trying to deal with where evolution is a type of
philosophy. Easy for you to say, right? Anyway, the thing about it is, Doug, is that we as creationists almost have to live up to a higher standard. Evolutionists get away with a lot of premises and presumptions that we can't get away with. And we're here to try to tell you we don't want them to get away with it either, because it really doesn't serve you well. It allows them to get away with a lot of chicanery, posing as argument and science and intellect, when in point of fact a lot of it is fallacious. It is fallacy, framed in all kinds of ways that sound sophisticated and real. And so without any further ado, I mean, there may be a couple of points you want to get
about logic.
Yeah, I guess that's it, because they don't teach that in school anymore, and they didn't really teach it when I was going to school either.
No.
Logic used to be a class you'd had to take back in the day, how to make an informed argument. And we live in really an existentialist world, Doug, a postmodern world, which really logic is not used very much. Antithetical reason, there's a thesis and an antithesis, is really not the order of the day. And unfortunately, we are not served well by that. Emotion rules. And rather than reason. And unfortunately, and it's not like reason can't be deceived as well, but the fact of the matter is, if you start with emotion, you're setting yourself up for a fall, and you're setting yourself for a lot of intellectual chicanery, as I said earlier. So, Doug, without any further ado, what do you want to start?
What I was going to talk about is, what is the basis that you have for your belief in evolution? Is it directly as a result of yourself observing scientific facts, or are you sort of relying upon hearsay from somebody else, from the people who claim to be the authorities in this area? So this is indeed a logical fallacy. Is to rely upon authority as your basis for your belief.
By the way, and authority in and of itself is not necessarily wrong, right. But if you don't check things out for yourself, you can get into a lot of trouble. Look, the church in the Middle Ages had a lot of problems with this, Doug. And we would think we would learn from that. But what's happened right now, and we've talked about this as well, Doug, in our secular, scientific, really atheistic type of worldview that's kind of really all over the whole world, the science has become the new high priests. So they become the new authorities. Yet they are as arbitrary and as human and as flawed as the priests were in the Middle Ages. And unfortunately, if you don't have the equipment or are not ready to argue from reason, from logic, from things that work, then you're gonna be duped. It's the old thing: if you don't stand for something, you fall for everything. Well, the fact of the matter is, arguments basically you fall for everything just because somebody in charge tells you so.
Yeah, so you have politicians dictating what you should believe. You have the Supreme Court dictating what you should believe.
Right, and the thing about that, Doug, yeah, it's interesting you talk about the Supreme Court. They're the highest thing in the land, but their decisions have been reversed over this. Look, the Dred Scott decision, the separate but equal things and all kinds of stuff have been reversed. They're human and they make mistakes. Paul himself said it in the New Testament. He said, "If I or an angel come to you preaching another gospel, let him be accursed." In other words, just because Paul was an apostle was no big deal. The church made this mistake, and guess what? The scientists are making the equal mistake, and they don't even claim to be having based in their authority in God. They base it their own human frailty. But so I think this is a good subject to tackle, Doug. What are some of the fallacies, or did you want to get first?
What I wanted to do is actually
introduce us to the book. Sure.
It's called The Ultimate Proof of Creation by Jason Lisle, Dr. Jason Lisle, and he's actually an astronomy buff. He's the guy who actually set up the planetarium at the Creation Museum
Right.
in Kentucky. And so I highly recommend this book because it does teach you about, how to reason, how to logic, and do logic. And
Is this a fairly new book, Doug, or is this something been around for a while?
it's been around for a little while. We've actually done a show on this a little while ago, maybe a couple of years ago.
Okay, so this book's been around for 3 or 4 years.
I think I actually got this in, might have gotten in South Africa or someplace.
Really? Okay.
But,
Anyway,
this is a excellent reference book if you want to study this subject, because he's using a proof, logical proof, to show that creation is the way to go here.
okay.
What I wanted to talk about is to give you a few examples of what a fallacy is, and if you know the counterfeit, it also helps to study the genuine. If you look at the counterfeit money, you can tell that if you've studied the
That's a real argument. In fact, that's how the Treasury Department, how they learn to detect counterfeit money, is not by studying all the different counterfeits that have come out, but by studying the real dollar. When you know what the real thing is, then the fake comes along. You go, oh, this doesn't pass the smell test, and it won't. And you can see it. Whether the ink is too bright, or it fades, or smears, or just doesn't have the detail, or whatever the differences that are. And like manner,
my dad built a counterfeit machine.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Where it sort of rolls up the bill in a little loop up there, and it appears like when you stick a blank piece of paper in it and unscrew it, out comes a dollar bill.
Yeah, out comes a buck. Yeah.
And so here it sort of makes it look like it's counterfeiting, but it's actually the real thing.
Yep. Well, the thing about it is the real blank piece of paper is embedded in the roll up, and the dollar bill that was already real from the start comes out. The thing about it is, Doug, with evolutionary arguments, oftentimes they start out with these premises or these ideas. A lot of times they start out, as you said, with authority. Well, my teacher told me this, or all the scientists believe it. I'm trying to think of other things. Everybody in the know believes this. Or it's like the old Hitlerian thing. If you say a lie long enough and loud enough and often enough, people will believe it. And oftentimes this is what you get. How many times on TV, Doug, do you hear the word millions of years? Every time you turn around, you're dealing with dinosaurs, you hear millions of years every single time.
Yeah, that's a fallacy, because it's this fallacy of equivocation. Because when you take two different things and associate them with each other and repeat it long enough, you begin to associate the two things together.
Well, that's why I say the real problem with the evolution thing, if we ever did find a living dinosaur, because they've equivocated this so much, they would be in a lot of trouble. Yet in reality, there's no big deal about if there was a living dinosaur any more than there would be a living dodo bird or a living woolly mammoth. If we found one, it was okay. There's a pocket of creatures of this type that they don't even have any problem, Doug, with reptiles, turtles, alligators, lizards, things like that, which supposedly lived in the age of the dinosaurs.
But the dinosaurs have become the evangelism lizards of the evolution.
Right, and they have equivocated that with millions of years, because they need that time to have the evolutionary premise come true as they describe it. Not as you in the audience may think it means, change over time. If that's all evolution would be, then fine, I'm an evolutionist, because it's very obvious 2 dogs on Noah's Ark got into all the different dogs that we see now. But what they're talking about is something from fundamentally different, not only fundamentally different, but some fundamentally simpler in the sense of complexity, although even the most simple organism is complex, into something entirely different by adding and putting something into the genetic code that wasn't there before. That's a whole different premise. But
let's talk about tautology. A tautology is where you're...
Is that something we were taught? Study being taught?
Taught a tautology, yeah.
Okay, so what is that?
What it is that you're taking one of the things that taking one of your assumptions and then presenting it as a conclusion.
Can you give me an example of that, Doug? Do you have one?
It's sort of like saying you're going to arrive when you get there.
Well, okay. Yeah, well, okay.
And that's sort of the tautology, is you're sort of repeating the same thing, but you're taking the thing that you're assuming and you're making it your proof.
Would that be called a circular argument? Would that be the same thing, or is that different?
It's
Similar?
Kind of similar to a circular argument, but in this case, you're just rewording your premise so that it now becomes your
conclusion. Okay.
And so that's something to watch out for when you're looking at literature arguments concerning evolution.
Well, how do they phrase? How would something like that be? Can you think of something that how they would have said something that in an evolutionary context? I'm trying to think of how they would do that, because it's like I'm trying to think of an example.
Well, an example would be in radiometric dating. Is that
good.
We are,
Okay.
Doing a tautology here is that their assumptions are driven based upon the calibration of their method, which is based upon
their assumptions
on their assumptions of millions of years, and so they believe these certain layers of rock, and they are laid down over millions of years, and so they calibrate their instruments in this manner.
That's a very good argument, because I'll tell you what, we've talked about this many times ad nauseum on the show, but it can't be repeated often enough. It's like, Doug, there are rocks they've dated, and if they get too old of a date as well as too young of a date, they will automatically throw them out as being contaminated or been something, but I'm going, well, how do you know that the rocks that give you the dates you want aren't contaminated? Well, because they give us the date we want. That's exactly an example of a tautology. They give us the date we want, therefore that's the right date. It hasn't been contaminated. Well, that's an assumption. That's a premise and the conclusion becoming the same thing. That's an excellent one, radiometric dating. So, Doug, do we need to belabor that, or you want to just talk some more about that?
Talk about the straw man argument. Which,
yeah, you like that one, yeah.
Something that's quite easy to show. It's sort of like the flat Earth theory is a typical one.
Right.
That creationists are like flat Earth.
Right.
So,
right.
It's easy. What you're doing is you're making up a scenario that the people who you're debating really don't believe.
Right.
But what you're doing is characterizing them in that way, and then you shoot down the straw man.
Similar to this, Doug, are things that may perhaps have been true at one time. Creationists aren't perfect. We make premises and assumptions and present ideas that may or may not be true, because we weren't living in when the Noah's flood happened either. And we don't have any of that stuff to know how some of the rock strata was laid down and what kind of things, orders. We have ideas based on certain assumptions and premises. But for instance, Doug, like at one time it was very common for us to believe in a canopy theory, and some people still hold on to it, but as a source for the rain in Noah's Ark, or the Noah's flood. Well, that's kind of been proven to be, there wouldn't have been enough thickness of the canopy to present enough waterfall. We would have cooked to death, okay, based on any kind of ideas, understanding of water vapor things. I'm thinking of some other premises.
A little bit of history on that.
Yeah.
Is that Henry M. Morris actually commissioned Dr. Larry Vardaman to study this, because Vardaman is a weather guy.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he actually did the calculations on this to take this idea away from the creation model. Now, we believe that there was a canopy. I still like the canopy theory.
Yeah.
But it doesn't explain the origin of the world.
What I'm getting at is that if an evolutionist try to use that anymore, let's say even a better argument, Doug, maybe than the canopy theory, the fixity of species.
Right.
There's really no creationist that believes in a fixity of species. We don't believe that, and I don't know of any creationist that does. We do believe in fixity of kinds. Right. We do believe a dog, for instance, or the dog kind, But we do, within that, there's all kinds of genetic variation that we believe was programmed in at the very origin or creation of things. Most of our change, though, has to do with deleting information, or shuffling what's already there, not adding something to make it something uniquely or something that wasn't a dog before. But the fixity of species, Doug, would be a straw man argument, Doug. If they try to say we believe in fixity, that nothing changes at all. We believe in no change at all. That would be a straw man argument, because no creationist believes that. I'm just thinking through, I think some other ones that might fit that bill, Doug. But there are things that I think may perhaps be a straw man argument, and maybe are today. For instance, people may believe, and we even talked about this back in the day, 20 years ago maybe, was the law of entropy in existence before the fall? In other words, was the second law of thermodynamics in operation? And the answer has to be yes, it had to be, because you couldn't even eat food if it wasn't. You know, there are certain. So the idea, but from Scripture, it's really interesting, Doug, because you get the idea from how God has programmed everything. It's not that heat energy is there, but there's always a continual restoration. The eternal purpose is not about things being used. It's about always have an unlimited supply of energy and power and substance to renew itself over and over again forever. And I think that's kind of a different thing. It's alluded to even, you look at in the book of Revelation, talk about the leaves for the healing of the nations. It's like the idea that things are going to be regenerated over and over again. I think that's kind of fascinating. It's a premise we haven't really talked a lot about, but I'm trying to think of any other straw man arguments, but or you say, well, creationists don't believe in the radiometric dating, or they don't believe in dinosaurs. Creationists don't believe in dinosaurs. You know, what? You know, that's and there are some probably people who have not studied the issue that might even think, well, dinosaurs are mythological. I go, no, they're not, you know, but that would be a straw man argument. So what else you got?
The next one is false cause, and I'm trying to think of an example. That's what I was trying to achieve.
It's called false cause, was it?
False cause.
False cause.
In other words, you come to a conclusion saying it's cold outside and it's snowing, and so the conclusion that you could make is it's cold outside because it's snowing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah. And how do we do? Okay. And there's a lot of arguments like that. Yeah, what specific concrete examples in creation thing would be? I'm trying to think what would work for that. But you see two things that are like corollaries happening at the same time, and you think there's a causation or a direct relation and there may be a direct relation, but the one isn't the cause of the other thing. I see what you're saying. What would be in?
Well, I would say one idea of this is that. If you take tree rings and you in the bristlecone pines, and you cut down a bristlecone pine and it's got 4,000 rings, well, that means that it's 4,000 years old. Now, that may be true, but it also could you have really no way of verifying it, and so this is, in my mind, a false cause, because you could have multiple rings in 1 year.
Or one ring for 3 years or something. If you have a drought, if you have drought conditions, or you have a very rainy season or something like that. And as I understand, I don't know about all trees or what tree. Generally speaking, yeah, it's like they say a ring is per year, but that's not always true. And I think they verify that is not always true. That I couldn't tell you, but that would be a false cause.
If you cut down a tree and you can make that assumption that each tree growth was an annual thing.
Doug, and related to that, how about the sedimentary strata?
That's another one.
That to me, that's a fault. Especially since our Mount St. Helens giant laboratory has shown that layers can be laid down in rapid succession in a very short period of time. It sort of not belabors, but it sort of denies that is an actual thing, even though it's the old uniform. Here's the uniformitarianism itself, Doug, which you call uninformitarianism, is that uninformitarianism, because in quite point of fact, when you were not there when these things were formed, how do you know how long it took for each sedimentary layer to go down? We have the premise, if there's a worldwide flood, strata could have been laid down very quickly. Mount St. Helens and that Spirit Lake runoff, the thing down, show that that's indeed not only possible, but it's actually has been done that way. So that is that would be a one of those, like your tree ring analogy, that doesn't, it's not a corollary that even though you see right now maybe one layer gets laid down per year, it doesn't mean that that's the way it always was, or always will be.
There's something called VARs, which is the sedimentary layers that is supposed to be one thin layer per year laid down.
Right, that's what I was talking about, yeah.
Shallow sea.
Oh, yeah.
And so that again is false cause, is that it was laid down 1 year at a time. And so you're assuming what you want to prove, but you're not really, you really don't have any.
What you're proving is based on what your observation is right now. Basically, a layer gets put down there per year. But what you can't prove is whether that's always been that way. In point of fact, it seems like that's probably not the way it is, okay?
Now, we already talked about appeal to authority, but I also wanted to talk about appeal to the majority. In other words, let's vote on it, and we're going to make a decision here whether or not this is true based upon our vote. And
that's consensus science.
Yeah, and it's sort of this theory based upon our political system where Vox, something like that, is the voice of the people is the voice of God.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Vox Deus or voice, yeah. How does that go? Anyway, it doesn't matter. The Latin thing, but
Vox Populi, Vox Deus.
Something like that, okay. Anyway, so yeah, and it's interesting, Doug, especially in our political thing where minority seems to rule these days, but in creation, no, it's the majority. The majority is the authority, okay. But you know what? We have countless examples how that has not been the case in science, in medicine, in discovery. It's very difficult though to overturn an entrenched majority, Doug. It's very difficult unless, Doug, you're very much willing to throw it over. In other words, I think there's something we don't always account for, Doug, because when we look at it, why did the world go so quickly to accepting Darwinian and Lyellian geology, Darwinian thing? And I think it's because the hearts are hard and they wanted to get rid of an authority that wasn't themselves. And so that happened. And Doug, so we're in a situation where, as we're the minority, but yet we're also suffering from the fact that even though there's a God-given spark, I believe, in all of us, there's that nature in us that wants to live the way we want to live without somebody telling us what to do.
Yeah, the truth is in us, and in Romans chapter 1 talks about this. There is this appeal that sin has in us to actually cause us to fall away and to want to believe a lie, and that's really what's going on.
And there's two wars going on there, Doug, and it's interesting how that works. There's a spark of divinity, and there's that spark of rebelliousness that's in fights in each one of us. And so the idea with fallacy, doing that, Doug, seems to me, is to try to present when we're in a more reasonable mood to look at these things and say, is it really, and to point out, so when you see this happening on television or in your classroom, or in things like that, you can say, oh no, that's a straw man. Oh, that's appeal to the majority. Oh, that's appeal to arbitrary authority. Oh, that's assuming the premise to be true. Reification, that's the one. That's the one where you basically the premise is assumed to be true.
Well, reification is sort of like you can't fool Mother Nature. It's taking something that's inanimate and giving it some sort of mind or living type of purpose.
Yeah, the fossil doesn't say it's 65 million years ago or 225. The fossil can't speak. And you hear people say the fossil record speaks for itself.
That's right. And
No.
No, it doesn't speak.
It doesn't speak at all. Okay, your assumption is what's speaking, or is what you're speaking. That's what's happening based on this. There's nothing on a T-Rex bone that says 65 million BC.
Right.
It doesn't happen. Okay.
There's another fallacy I really kind of like the term for it. It's called chronological snobbery.
Oh, do tell us about that, Doug. What is that?
That's the idea that either something is modern or you appeal to tradition. It goes both ways.
Oh, it goes both ways. Okay.
And so you are appealing to, there isn't any modern scientist that believes in creation, or if you appeal
Which is false, but
to tradition, you're talking about, because we've always done it this way, that's the way it should be.
oh yeah.
And so it's something that we as creationists have to watch out for, as well as evolutionists. And of course, another thing is it was on the internet.
Oh, it's on the internet. It's got to be true. Most people know that's not right.
And a little bit about it's the opposite of false cause, is where your argument does not follow.
What's that?
It'd be like it's snowing outside and it's cold outside, and so.
Oh, what you talked about earlier, yeah.
And so it's cold outside, so it must be snowing. And that argument does not follow.
No, because yeah. In fact, sometimes it gets too cold, it won't snow. So, well, Doug, with the time we got left, what do we have? Anything left you want to hit?
Well,
begging the question. What about that one?
Well, that means that you're sort of leading up to a conclusion that you're trying to bring about, this sort of thing by your argument.
Yeah, well, I always think it begs the question when people basically, well, this is totally wouldn't be a different, but people appeal to aliens when there's nothing when all the evidence seems to point against evolution could have ever happened on this planet, then they appeal to aliens. But that begs the question where the aliens come from,
Exactly, yeah.
So that doesn't really help you,
And we have ambiguity and obfuscation, which is just giving a fog job, It's like the cloud computing, it's a sort of a fog.
Well, I found out that I talk about the barrage approach, and when you answer one question, they come up with 16 other ones,
Right.
and basically you can answer all of them, but you don't have the time to do it. They just boom, 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 they barrage you with stuff because they're not trying to be fair. They're not really being fair debaters in this instant. There's a whole lot of the stuff that's out there, Doug, and it's deceptive and dishonest.
We're only about halfway through the list, but we're out of time. Right?
Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 on this, Doug, because it is fascinating. There's a lot of these arguments out there that really need to be laid to rest, or at least you need to be made aware of them so you can think rationally when these are presented. You can still choose to believe them or not, but you don't necessarily have to swallow it wholesale.
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. We hope you enjoyed our show.